Hey, William Gilmore here for the ScreenwritersJourney.com. It's day 189 of the journey, and I have to confess that I did spend most of this past weekend sort of moping about the house over the screenplay come-ups. Some of the feedback that I've been getting from trusted friends has not been necessarily what I was hoping it would be. It hasn't been bad, it hasn't been horrible. Touched on a few things that I was concerned about, so it wasn't a complete surprise. I was hoping that maybe I had solved some of the issues, but they seem to still be there to some extent. And I'm sort of at a loss at this point as to what to do with the piece or how to correct those problems. So this may be a good time to take a little time away from the script and come back to it in a couple of weeks with some fresh eyes and let some ideas percolate in my head to try to resolve some of these issues. I've spent a lot of time over the past 6 months concentrating just on this script. Now, of course, if my coverage that I paid for from an industry service comes back with stellar reviews, then I'm good to go and I can move on and I don't have to worry about that. Well, that coverage came back this morning and it was not stellar. It wasn't horrible, to be honest. When I first read it, it was sort of, it felt like there was a piling on of the issues and just kind of like, all these horrible bad things happening in your screenplay, and I felt really bad. But after having some time to digest it and think about it, and I should go back through and start actually reading through the coverage, it's actually a lot better than my initial reaction. I actually got one consider and one pass. Judging from their point scale and how they grade it, the pass is a very, very high pass. It's just below consider level. The consider is sort of, I believe, probably on the low end of the consider, but it's still a consider. They're not recommends, which I would really have loved to have gotten, but Screenplay Readers, which is the service that I went with, says that only 1% of their scripts get recommends, 4% get a consider, 95% get a pass. And so one reader put me in that 95% category of pass, but I think I'm right on the edge of getting the consider, judging from the scoring. And the other one gave me a consider, so I'm in that top 5% there. So we're very close. We are close. So those are all good things. Now, I did have a lot of trepidation in sending this out to industry service coverage. These are services that are provided by third parties. They're not actually agents or production companies, whatever, who are doing their own coverage. And if you go into forums or talk to screenwriters, there's a lot of concern among writers in sending out to services like this. A lot of people think it's a waste of time and a waste of money. It can be quite expensive, and you're never quite sure who it is that's going to be reading your script. Do they have the qualifications to actually dissect it, and are they knowledgeable enough to know what they're talking about? Sometimes that's just sour grapes on the part of the screenwriter. They didn't like my script, so they must not know what they're talking about. Because the reality is, when you're sending your script to an agent or a production company or a producer or a director, and they give it to their readers, you don't know who their readers are either. You don't know what their qualifications are. You're hoping because they are working in the industry with these people that they are qualified, but you really don't know. So going either way, either paying for the service and getting it, or just going ahead and sending it right to the production companies and letting their readers have a look at it, you don't really get to see their coverage. They don't provide you with that. So you don't know what their real reaction is. So basically, it's a crapshoot either way. The good thing that you can get out of going with a service provider is that it at least gives you an idea, hopefully, what direction you need to go on your script. That's not always the case. I've used several different coverage services in the past, not with great results. I've had a couple that actually came back, but that I thought they were decent coverage reports. And that's not to say that I got a great report or they really loved my script, but I thought their comments were really well thought out and they had good points to make. And some of them actually took them up on and made changes accordingly. Some of the services that I've used have not been quite so good. Sometimes they come back and they tear apart characters who aren't in your script. They tear apart scenes that aren't part of your script, and they'll ask questions about certain plot points. And why didn't you resolve this issue? This is a main issue. And you're like, I did resolve that. That's sort of the finale of the story. And, whatever happened to the character of Dr. Mott? You set him up as this person, and then we never see what happens to him. Like, well, he's killed by the protagonist of the story in the big finale, and he takes his power. This is another screenplay that I wrote, so sort of a horror script, and yeah, the power from one character transfers to another, and the new character kills the old character, and it pretty much resolves what happened to him. And it's a big scene where he kills him, and I'm not sure how they missed that, but they did. I had one service came back and had all these questions that they pointed out specifics for about the first 30 pages. This happened on page 10, this happened on page 15, this happened on page 20. And then somewhere around page 30, they stopped being specific and started asking questions about characters and situations that were clearly resolved in the screenplay. That were big major events. And like, well, I didn't understand, why you didn't resolve this. Like, you didn't read past the first act, did you? So they do that sometimes. They'll just read the first act and sort of extrapolate what they think may or may not happen, and that's good enough. And that when you pay money to get a service like that, you expect them to read the whole script, and sometimes they don't. But again, I have had other service providers that have done very solid work and have really come back and given me some good advice on scripts. Not necessarily liking the script, but having good solid points to make about it. And as a writer, you have to be able to divest yourself and sort of stand aside from the script that you've put so much time into, and you really are heavily invested in it, and you want it to get those great reviews. And it doesn't always happen. A lot of times, you know things about the story that are in your head that aren't necessarily on the page, and so you fill it in as you're reading it because but it's not necessarily there on the page. So you have to see what they got and what they didn't get and figure out, did I explain it well enough, and things like that. So let's have a look at the coverage I got from Screenplay readers. Now, Screenplay readers, I did a little research on them. They have a roster of readers. You can select one if you want, or you can just let them select it. That's what I chose to do in this case. They have 3 different options for their coverage. You can get 1 reader for $97, 2 readers for $167, or 3 readers for $239. These are actually pretty reasonable prices, particularly for what you get. I went with the middle package, 2 readers for $167, and what you get for that is a log line, so you can see if the log line you've been working on matches up with what they've got. They give you a 2 to 3 page synopsis, plus 3 to 4 pages of critical comments, and a 25 category checklist rating such things as characters, dialogue, format, things like that. You can also ask each reader 3 questions regarding your coverage, and they promise to get your coverage back to you in 72 hours. I've had some that have taken 2 to 4 weeks before. Austin Film Festival, I know a lot of people like that. I can't really say anything about the competition or the festival itself, but their coverage, when you submit a script to the competition, for like an extra $100, you can get coverage on your script. And they promise that it'll be back in a certain amount of time, and it's usually a couple of months. But all coverage will be back by the beginning of June, I think it was, and by the beginning of July, I hadn't received anything yet. It had already been several months since I submitted. They'd already announced their semifinalists and whatnot, so I knew I hadn't made it, so I'm like, where's my coverage? And so I finally contacted them, and they said, oh, well, there was a delay, and we lost some things, but we're getting it to you, and you'll have it by July 15th. And I got it sometime around the beginning of August. So I went about almost 6 months. 6 months is a long time to wait for coverage when you've paid $100. And what I got back was one page, some very generic notes. It was not worth the money at all. So I would not recommend the Austin Film Festival coverage notes. I won't comment on the competition or the festival itself because I'm not that familiar with it. But with the coverage notes, I know they can take a really long time and they don't really give you that much. So it's not, I don't think it's worth the money. You can get better coverage elsewhere. So that brings us up to Screenplay readers. You can find it at screenplayreaders.com. I had the two readers, one male and one female. The female, what's her name? D.M. Lee. I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. She's the one who gave the screenplay a pass. She was obviously a little more critical of the piece than my male reader, who was Mr. Stribling. What is his first name? William Stribling. I should know that. William. Let's see. Miss Lee said the script is a straightforward premise with a lot of action and conflict. The characters are complex and sympathetic. Yay, Shep! You seem to have maybe broken that. I don't know. However, she did feel that Shep and Grady were a little too similar in their characters. That was a problem for her in the first shootout at the cabin. They seemed to be a little too much alike. They both seem to have a level of toughness. She would like to have seen maybe Shep in particular to have a little more panic. And I thought I had that in there. He's the one cowering behind the car when all the shooting's going on, but he does sort of initiate things when he goes out to protect his brother to save him. So maybe I can do a little more to bolster that. It's not a huge note, I don't think. I think that's easily resolved. Next big complaint, or criticism, I should say, was that the characters weren't active enough in the first half of the second act. Pointing out the fact that Raydell holds up in his house until the midpoint and really doesn't do a whole lot. He's just sort of in there drinking. And yeah, she's right. She is absolutely right on that. That was something that I was kind of worried about and something I was trying to work on. I spent a lot of time restructuring the first half of the second act, trying to figure that out. And I think structurally it all works and it all makes sense. But from a dramatic standpoint, it could probably be better. So that's going to be a big thing to fix. And I've spent a lot of time on it already, but that's something that a lot of writers have problems with their second act. And you always hear that writers get lost in the second act. And I may not be lost, but I'm sort of wandering aimlessly. So I need to strengthen that. In fact, I said here in my blog notes, if you've wondered aloud on your own blog at the start of the second act is too slow and the characters might not be active enough, it's kind of hard to argue with the coverage reader for calling you on it. So score one for Ms. Lee. She also thought the characters weren't proactive enough. They were reactive. That's true. They could maybe be a little more proactive. That's something I think I can do with Shep to make him a little stronger character. But the situation they find them in, it is a lot of reacting. They're in over their heads, and it's hard for them to get out of it. So they do spend a lot of time reacting. I'm not sure that's necessarily a bad thing. It's a different type of dramatic structure. Maybe not the best. So if I can find ways to make them a little more proactive, I think that it'll help. Because as I say here, if the situation overwhelms you, you tend to be more reactive. It becomes increasingly difficult for the characters to get ahead of the game. They get swallowed up by it. But there are things they can do, to try and get themselves out of that situation that would allow them to be proactive and be more active in the story rather than simply reacting. So again, these are all problems in the first half of the second act, things that, I'm just going to have to work on. Ms. Lee's other major criticism was a lack of a goal for Shep. this is something I've also previously discussed that I've been concerned about. This was really a big problem when I was viewing Shep as my protagonist. I thought it was less of an issue by making Raydell the protagonist. Shep just wants to get out of this mess. He just wants it to go away. But in choosing to do that, as Ms. Lee says, that makes him more reactive rather than proactive, and that does slow the story down a little bit. So I think I've got to work on something there with Shep. She also considered Shep the protagonist. She did not see Raydell as the protagonist, and that's something that I worked fairly hard on, trying to restructure and refocus that onto Raydell, and evidently I haven't made that switch clear enough, although Mr. Stribling has a comment on that, so we'll get to that in a moment. Let's see, Ms. Lee also wrote the log line, where she identifies the story as being about three men who stumble on a drug deal. My log line centers the story around a low-level drug dealer seeking to make his break into the big time. So obviously, she saw the story more from the three guys in the boat perspective as opposed to Raydell and his crew. So that's something I've just got to make stronger. She did suggest that I combine Shep and Grady into one character because they were so similar. Doing that really changes the structure of the story considerably, and would be almost a page one rewrite. Would it be a better story if I did that? I don't know. It would certainly be a very different story. So I'm going to continue with what I've got so far. I think that's the way I want to go. I like the dynamic there. It's a story that I want to tell. But she does raise the question of, is that the best story to tell? I don't know yet. I need to do some more work and see if I can fix these other problems, and then we'll look at it and see if that makes a change. So that brings me to Mr. Stribling's review. His take was much more positive, calling the script a strong genre piece with a killer first act. Yay me. That's a pretty good statement. Mr. Stribling, however, finds he doesn't particularly like the characters. Damn it, Shep. We're supposed to win him over. But he fully understands their motivations. He calls it a satisfying tragedy on how the poor choices of few men destroy the lives of everyone around them. This sort of relates back to what my second personal reader commented on. She's the one who didn't really like the characters with the first final version that I sent, and then when I sent the revised version with that extra scene with Shep and the guys at the boat ramp, she found her perceptions of Shep had shifted, and she found him much more likable. My question was he actually a likable character, or was he simply more likable than he had been? And it would seem from Mr. Stribling's review, since he did not get to see that earlier version, that although Shep may be more likable, he is not yet likable. But that may be okay, because he made a similar comment that this was just sort of a satisfying tragedy, and that's something that my second reader had also commented on. She's likened it to a Greek tragedy where everyone sort of pays a price, or a Shakespearean tragedy where everybody dies at the end, like Hamlet, which is a great comment, by the way, to be compared in such a way. So I think it's okay that maybe he's not quite as like, I'm sorry, my screen just went totally white here and blew up all this white. Let me see if I can tone that down a little bit. Goodness gracious. Hold on. There. That's a little bit, I was sort of washed out there for a second. So that idea of the grand tragedy may work, that the characters don't necessarily have to be super likable. We still want somebody to root for, but it may not be as big an issue as I was thinking it was going to be. The issue of the protagonist, whether it was Raydell or Shep, was much less an issue for Mr. Stribling than it was for Ms. Lee. In fact, he saw the story as a dual narrative with two protagonists, so he clearly got the idea that Raydell was a protagonist. So I have sort of and I'll buy that completely, that there's sort of a dual storyline going on between the two sides. And so I've gone far enough that people are starting to be aware. Mr. Stripling obviously picked up on that. Ms. Lee did not pick up on that, apparently, from her comments. So was it something that she just didn't pick up on, or did I not make it strong enough to make it clear? And Mr. Stripling may have just been a little more perceptive in reading into what I was intending, and not necessarily the writing making it obvious. So, and I think if I can clean up Shep somewhat and make him a little more proactive in the top of the second act, and certainly give Raydell something more to do than just sit around his house drinking, I think that'll go a long way to solving that issue. Mr. Stripling also called into question the half-brother taunt, which I had reworked before sending the script out, where I took the taunt away from Shep and gave it to Tyler to help soften Shep a little bit. Definitely seemed to have softened Shep, but Mr. Stripling thought that it was a little too much. It was really foreshadowing in the end. I was like sort of hitting it over the head that, this is going to come back in a payoff somewhere. So I could probably cut some of those out. So can certainly do that. That brings us to the 25-point checklist. And the two readers were really almost on opposite ends here when we actually got to see how they scored the script. Ms. Lee gave the originality of the script a meager 62 out of 100. 62, not very good. Whereas Mr. Stripling rated it as an 80, almost 20 points higher. Big difference. And my question, and one of the reasons why I'm glad I got a female reader and a male reader, is it's certainly a guy-centric story. It's a guy film. It's not a chick flick. It's not a date flick. Guys may drag their girlfriends along to see it, but I don't think women are going to like it quite as much as the guys will. I would certainly like to make it more enjoyable for women, because that certainly opens up the market somewhat. But it is very much a guy film, and that's what I seem to be getting back from even my personal readers. The men like it more than the women, and in this particular case with the industry readers, same thing. So I think that just goes with the genre. Let's see, the first 10-page setup was rated 72 by Ms. Lee and 90 by Mr. Stripling. So again, the male reader liked the setup much more than the female reader did. Clear stakes for the characters was rated 76 versus 91. Again, Ms. Lee on the low end and Mr. Stripling on the high end. Rising tension, 65 from Ms. Lee, 95 from Mr. Stripling. So very high scores there. The coverage readers did reverse the scores, however, on the readability categories. This is on format and spelling, the action prose. Ms. Lee gave the format a perfect 100. Thank you, Dave Trottier. Mr. Stripling, on the other hand, gave it only an 85. So he found problems with the formatting. And this is one of those things. Formatting, I see it in the forums all the time. People arguing about the formatting. What's right, what's wrong. You're stupid. You don't know what you're doing. You're an amateur. Only do it this way. And then the next person comes along and says, no, don't ever do it that way. There's so many different ways out there, and it's just going to depend on your reader. The only thing I can say is, I followed Dave Trottier's Screenplay Bible religiously. And I went through it line by line, checking things. And if I had any doubt at all, I went to his examples and really compared them and changed things to match. So I'm pretty darn accurate on the Screenwriter's Bible formatting. So I'm gonna go with Ms. Lee on this one, 100. Spelling and grammar, Ms. Lee gave me a 98. 72 from Mr. Stripling. I question the low score on that one because the spelling, I'm pretty darn sure there's no misspellings in there. The grammar, I don't know what he's getting at with the grammar. The characters certainly speak in bad grammar, but it's dialogue. It's the way they speak as characters. I would say the action sequences are written fairly strongly. or grammatically correctly. There are things that I have abbreviated and done sentence fragments because you're just trying to some of the action you just want to skim through. You don't need to get in a lot of detail. So maybe that's where he brought it down. Not sure. The action prose, and this is one that gets me. The prose of the action, the actual descriptions. Ms. Lee gave me a 95. Again, very high marks, very near the top. Mr. Stripling gave me a 70, and yet he said, oh, here it is. He thought some of the action could be trimmed down, but he seemed to really like the well-choreographed fight scenes. In fact, he said he wouldn't change a word of those descriptions. So I wouldn't have guessed that he would have given quite that low a score, considering his good comments. It seemed a little contradictory that he had such good comments about the action and the prose, and don't change a word, and then to give it such a low score that I question that. I'd like to know what his thoughts are. Maybe that's a question I can send in to him. This is also reflected in the action text. The action text shows instead of tells category. Another question here. Ms. Lee gave me a 98, very high, saying that it showed instead of told. And Mr. Stripling only gave me a 68. That's a pretty low score, particularly for someone who commented that the well-choreographed fight scenes I shouldn't change a word of. So I'm not sure about that score. And finally, the overall readability of the script was rated 98 by Ms. Lee and only a 76 by Mr. Stripling. Again, some of his comments, on how good things were and how well they were written, and that he wouldn't change things to rate it that low. I kind of question. But if I'm going to question that, shouldn't I question his really high scores in the previous sections? I don't know. I can pick and choose what I want to keep, I guess. So Ms. Lee seems to be much more consistent overall. All her comments, I think, are reflected well in her scores. They may be a little lower than I would have gotten from the comments, but they're in line with things she said. But she didn't have any problem with the formatting or the readability or anything like that. I got very high scores there. But the big takeaway here is that all these opinions are subjective. The key to both reviews is to discover, where each reader commented on the same issues, and they do hit on a couple of the same things, the slowdown in the first half of the second act, whether or not Shep is or is not the protagonist, and the characters being more reactive than proactive. I think those are things that they both hit on. Some of those are things that I was already concerned about. I was wondering if I had satisfied that. Apparently I have not. Overall, I would say I was pretty pleased with the coverage. It was not as good as I was hoping it would be. And it was a little discouraging at first in reading through it, but after going through it and really dissecting their comments and looking at the different things, I think it's actually a pretty good assessment. I think they have good comments. They hit on things that I was already in the back of my mind worried about and had mentioned here on the blog. So I would say it was pretty good coverage. I did not get a recommend, but I'm not that far off. I'm up there in that right around the top 5%. So maybe a little cleanup, a little polishing, maybe a little restructuring in the top of the second act, and I can push it up into that recommend category. So it's pretty close. The big question right now, the big issue I'm going to have is working that top of the second act. I'm not quite sure what to do yet. I have a couple of ideas, but they're just kind of fermenting. So I think now would be a good time to take a little break, step away from this, look at some other projects that I have underway or considering, and begin to play around with those a little bit, and let this just sit back and let it fade back a little bit, and then come back to it in a couple of weeks and have fresh eyes and attack it again and see if a new reading will give me new ideas with these notes in mind. So I would definitely consider Screenplay readers again. I thought they did a pretty good job. I would have loved for them to give me a recommend and just said, this is the greatest script we've ever read. Not since Godfather, maybe Citizen Kane. But it's not that type of script. It's not. It never will be. I perfectly understand that. But it can still be a good script. It can be a good story, enjoyable, romp in the theater. And it's got a little ways to go yet, but not as far as I was thinking this morning that it had to go. I think it's certainly doable. I think it's certainly something that I can make happen in a very short time. I'm just going to give a little rest. So that's where I'm at today. Feeling better tonight than I did this morning, and certainly better than I felt over the weekend. I was just getting way too close to it, so it's time to step back. And that's all I have for now. This was a lot longer than I was hoping it was going to be, but I wanted to put that out there. Screenplay readers, you can find them at screenplayreaders.com if you want to check them out and see if maybe it's something that you would want to send your own script to when it's ready to get your coverage. I would definitely, if you don't do industry service coverage, definitely find some trusted friends who will give you honest opinions on your work, because you've got to get that kind of feedback. When you get so close to it, like I have been with this particular script, it's hard to see the forest for the trees. So you need something from the outside to sort of poke you in the directions you need to go into. And when you're ready, Screenplay readers may be a choice for you. Whatever service you go with, try to be objective at looking at those notes. I know it's difficult. I certainly was less objective this morning when I read them. It was just like, oh God, all this work for nothing. Now I'm at work and I got to deal with this. But after letting it sit for a while and coming back and really, and trying to separate myself from it, they're good constructive notes, and there's a lot of positive things in here, a lot of positive comments. So I think it's definitely a good direction. So just remember that when you're doing your own service note, your coverage notes. Try to be objective. Listen to what they're saying. Sometimes you can just ignore them and throw it out if they come back and start talking to you about characters that don't exist or scenes that don't exist, or asking you about what happened to this major character who was blown up in the big finale, things like that. Then you did not get good service or good coverage. But you won't know that unless you're objective. It's too easy to be subjective in this because you're so close to it. So it's really something you got to work at. I'm starting to ramble now. It's time to go to bed. I got to go back to work in the morning. So I just wanted to catch everybody up on that. Please let me know where you are in your own work. Have you completed your script? Are you ready for notes? Are you sending it out? Are you sending it out too early? That's always a big question. Anyway, you can always catch me at william@thescreenwritersjourney.com for email, or you can reach me in the box down below and drop me a line there, and I will get back to you. Anyway, until next time, please keep up the good work and keep writing.